Hey there everyone, it's Mr. Lane here. In this lecture, we will look at art from the High Renaissance in Northern Europe and Spain from 1500 to 1600. Take good notes and let's begin. Key ideas include consequences of the Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter-Reformation, which we will discuss later in the lecture. There were a diversity of cultures and artistic styles. Albrecht Dürer was the greatest German printmaker of the 16th century and an international celebrity artist. In the Netherlands, art provides a picture of contemporary art and values. Here are the key terms. Here's a list of the artworks we will be analyzing. Let's look at this map of Europe in the 16th century. The Dukes of Burgundy held the most power in the Netherlands, and they fell out of power in 1477. France and the Holy Roman Empire absorbed the former Burgundian territories. Spain became the dominant European state. Monarchs increasingly used art and architecture to glorify their reigns. And wealthy merchants also cultivated art as a status symbol. Art in the Holy Roman Empire during the 16th century. In Germany, there was a widespread dissatisfaction with the church in Rome, which led to the Protestant Reformation, splitting Christendom in half. Protestants, led by Martin Luther, objected to the sale of indulgences and rejected most of the sacraments of the Catholic Church. They also condemned church decoration as a form of idolatry that distracted the faithful from communication with God. As a result, Protestant churches were relatively bare, but art still played an important role, especially prints, in a Protestant religion. The greatest German printmaker of the 16th century was Albrecht Dürer, a painter who we will look at next. Albrecht Dürer, self-portrait from 1500. Albrecht Dürer was known as Leonardo of the North. He traveled widely through Europe and became an international celebrity. He took trips to Italy to study Renaissance art. He was the first artist to synthesize Northern European stylistic features that included intricate details, realistic rendering of objects, symbols hidden as everyday objects, and blend them with Italian features, which included classical body types and linear perspective. He admired the work of Leonardo. He was the first artist to keep a thorough record of his life, self-portraits, treatises on his thoughts, and a diary. He was an important graphic artist, best known for his engravings. He was also significantly influenced by Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. The frontal pose we see depicted by the artist is typically reserved for Christ. Dürer intentionally evokes medieval devotional images of Christ. You can see the right hand of Christ, which is a standard gesture of blessing in Byzantine icons. This is also a reference to the artist's hand as a creative instrument. This self-portrait can be seen as the image of an artist as a divinely inspired genius. Dürer was also a humanist. He had an interest in how art and science can work together. It is interesting to note that in Dürer's time, it was believed that an eyewitness account documented Christ's existence. It appeared in a letter written by a Roman official who supposedly was a contemporary of Jesus, who gives a physical and personal description of Christ. We can see details similar to other Northern Renaissance artists like John Van Eyck. There is writing on the portrait. It reads, "Thus I, Albert Dürer of Nuremberg, made an image of myself in appropriate colors in my 28th year." In Dürer's day, paintings were usually made to commission. In contrast, prints made from woodcut and metal engravings were typically made for speculative sale. With this in mind, it is likely that the self-portrait was painted as a virtuous piece rather than for a specific client. It was an exercise that allowed Dürer to show off his exceptional observational skills and his technical abilities at depicting textures and facial features. The next piece by Dürer is titled "The Fall of Man, Adam and Eve," from 1504. Here we see a study of human proportions. Vitruvian was an ancient Roman architect who had an interest in proportions of the human body. These theories were based on arithmetic ratios. Throughout his life, Dürer was enthralled to the idea that the perfect human form corresponded to a system of proportion and measurements and could be generated by using such a system. Near the end of his life, he wrote several books codifying his theories. The first man and woman are shown in nearly symmetrical idealized poses, each with the weight on one leg, the other leg bent, and each with one arm angled slightly upward from the elbow and somewhat away from the body. The figure of Adam is reminiscent of the Hellenistic Apollo Belvedere, excavated in Italy late in the 15th century. In Latin, this reads, "Albert Dürer from Nuremberg made this in 1504. This print was not so much about the story of Adam and Eve, but an advertisement to show off Dürer's skill. These prints traveled, making its way all the way to India. He sold prints in single sheets, which people of ordinary means could buy, expanding his influence and audience. Four of the animals represent the medieval idea of the four temperaments. The cat is irritable, the rabbit positive, the ox unemotional, and the elk melancholic. The tension between the cat and mouse symbolize the relationship between Adam and Eve at the crucial moment right before they commit the original sin. Here's an image of the relief printmaking technique. Here's a link to a video that explains the hexagonal printmaking technique. Now, let's dive deeper into the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation was the establishment of Protestantism as distinct from Catholicism. The Reformation began in 1517 when Martin Luther nailed a list of his complaints, the 95 Theses, to the doors of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany. This led to a split in the Christian faith and the Counter-Reformation. Causes of the Reformation included corruption of the Roman Catholic Church, humanism, questioned the Church's traditions, and there was a resentment of secular rulers over the power of the popes and the clergy. Protestants believed that faith was deeply personal. Protestant churches were relatively plain, while the Catholic churches were heavily decorated with artworks to facilitate prayer, the act of repentance, and becoming closer to God. In the 1540s, the Catholic and Counter-Reformations began, which was a result of a civil war. This woodcut contrasts Catholic and Protestant views of how to achieve salvation. The two images are separated by a centrally placed tree that has leafy branches only on the Protestant right side. Let's start off by talking about the left side. The artist contrasted Catholicism based on an Old Testament law according to Luther. On this side, Judgment Day has arrived, as represented by Christ's appearance at the top of the scene, hovering amid a cloud halo and accompanied by angels and saints. Christ raises his left hand in the traditional gesture of damnation, and below, a skeleton drives off a terrified person to burn for eternity in hell. This person tried to live a good and honorable life, but despite his efforts, he fell short. Moses stands to the side, holding the tablets of the law, the Ten Commandments, which Catholics follow in their attempt to attain salvation. On the right side, we see the Protestants. This part was based on the gospel's belief in God's grace. The Protestant doctrine emphasized God's grace as a source of redemption. Accordingly, God showers the sinner in the right half of the print with grace as streams of blood flow from the crucified Christ. At the far left are Adam and Eve, whose original sin necessitated Christ's sacrifice. In the lower right corner of the woodcut, Christ emerges from the tomb and promises salvation to all who believe in him. The Netherlands was one of the most commercially advanced and prosperous countries in 16th century Europe. Much of Netherlandish art of this period provides a picture of contemporary life and values. The leading Netherlandish painter of the early 16th century was Hieronymus Bosch, one of the most fascinating artistic personalities in history. Bosch's most famous painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, is also his most puzzling, and no interpretation has ever won universal acceptance. Although the work is a large triptych, which would suggest a religious function as an altarpiece, The Garden of Earthly Delights was on display in the palace of Count Henry III, no later than 7 years after its completion. This suggests that the triptych was a secular commission, and some scholars have proposed that given the work's central themes of sex and procreation, the painting may commemorate a wedding. Access the link here to take a 3D interactive adventure of the Garden of Earthly Delights. Thanks for watching, everyone. Here's a list of additional resources.